extraordinary perseverance saw him pursue the thylacine to the only part of its former range, which is still unexplored.
I got a ring one night from a chap and asked me if I was interested in thylacines. I said yes, and he said, I think I know where there are some. And I said, I didn't say I heard that before, but what are you talking about? And he said, well, I'm a retired missionary, and I used to be up in the high country in Irian Jaya. And he said one night I was showing some pictures of Australian animals to the locals. When he showed them a photo of a tiger, they all got excited and started talking and saying, it's up there, it's up there.
His research revealed evidence of the thylacine's previous existence in Irian Jaya. But what tipped the scales for Ned was a letter from an American missionary still working in the remote high country.
Locals described them as having heads and shoulders like the white man's dogs, but with huge, strong mouths. Tail is long and thin, almost the same length as the body. From the ribs to the hips, they have no intestines, meaning they are very thin in that area, and that part has stripes. That was enough to get me motivated to go. I knew I had to go then. We spent 3 days up there, and we didn't see any sign of any wildlife at all. So we were very disappointed, and we humped our way back down to base camp. When we got back down, the other hunters were very excited and wanted to know what we'd seen, and we said we didn't see anything. And they call the small animals in couscous, they call them wiener. And they said, I said, we didn't even see any wiener. And they said, no wiener, no dobsegna. Now, dobsegna is their word for thylacine. So that made sense. If there was no food for the dobsegna, there'd be no dobsegna. There'd be a great trip to go back again and look in some of those caves where the other fellas said they'd seen them.
For a creature supposed to be extinct, the thylacine doesn't seem to be lying down and accepting its fate.
We were having our campfire in the dusk, and we could see something padding round behind us. And Leo said, I think that's a tiger. It's big enough. And sure enough, we got it, just bent down and got it against the fading sky, and you could see the shape of it. And it moved round and round. I could smell the food, I suppose. And then just once I caught a glimpse of it fairly close, and the firelight flashed in its eyes.
When most people make a report, there's no question that they're absolutely and utterly genuine, and many of them sincerely believe they've seen the thylacine. Whether they have or not is a different issue. So we take them all seriously. I respect people for making those reports. A lot of them, they're not easy to make. Some people are embarrassed about it. They're very shy about coming forward, and it's best that they do.
We divided round a yellow bush, and there on the other side, and we say that we were standing one on each side of it. Nancy, I remember, ran into the thing and kicked it. It was a thylacine, a very old one. It had been asleep, apparently, and hadn't heard us. And we looked down on it, and it was grey in the muzzle, and it sort of got to its feet very slowly and looked at us, and its eyes were just like an old dog's eyes. And we each grabbed our camera, and I thought again of that one in the Beaumaris Zoo. And we looked at each other and we put our cameras down, and we thought we couldn't condemn it to that. And so we just let our cameras go, and we stood there and we just watched it, and it just snarled at both of us and trotted off and walked off across the plateau into the sunset. The only thing we said about it, going down towards the lorry, Nancy said it probably won't survive the winter, and I said no, but it'll die for it.
There's a pattern, a loose pattern between years, and it tends to cycle with media interest. A lot of media interest will produce a burst of sightings, most of them retrospective, like, oh, I saw this thing 10 years ago and I'd never told anyone, but come forward, and that tends to happen, but it has softened. I can say that the last couple of years, it's beyond the odd sighting that's made the press. It's tapered right off.
It stopped and turned slightly the head, and I was able to see it for a minute and a half, approximately. I was quite some distance from where it was. I stopped my car and got out and had a really good look at it. A couple of days afterwards, I made a drawing of the Tasmanian Tiger as I'd seen it, and as I remembered it. I really believe and think that the tiger still exists. There may not be many of them, and they'll probably be hard to find, because it tried to walk across the road very stealthily, you know, as much as to say, well, I've seen you, but I don't think you'll see me again.
Considering the excitement of the moment, people are generally awful observers. A classic really is the number of different descriptions eyewitnesses give to the same bank robbery, and a thylacine sighting is exactly the same. So they usually, many of the sightings lose credibility because of that. The distance is greater, the time was less, the light was poorer, the animal, God knows what size it was. With footprints, I have a huge reference collection. We have excellent reference material for thylacine now. We've actually got copies of footprints that were taken from a fresh dead animal. This is taken many decades ago, and that's material that really wasn't available until 5 or 6 years ago because no one knew those existed. And I keep them, guard them fairly jealously, and I don't give out copies of them very readily at all. And that's proved to unravel many ifs and buts about footprints.
We were going into Launceston one night, and we seen this funny looking animal on the road. It was something different to the normal, and stood up like a kangaroo, as you might say, on his hind legs, and looked at us, and then went down on all fours, and then he gave a couple of hops. Like a kangaroo. And then he went down on all fours and off the side of the road as we drove past, you know, and didn't realise what it was, and we knew it was a different animal. We didn't realise what it was until we got right up to it, and you could see the stripes real clear, you know, no worries about that.
If we have a recent report, something that's days old and also comes out very good in the detail of light conditions, sobriety of the person, number of witnesses, distance, detail of what was seen, if there's a recent sighting with those high qualities and those aspects, we may and usually do visit the site to have a quick look for footprints or whatever.
Look, there's nearly always a rational explanation in terms of animals which are plentiful in the bush, be they wild dogs, escaped dogs, feral cats, tiger cats, which are very big. Most people haven't seen them, and they're very surprisingly big when you do see them in the bush.
A classic mistake is someone seeing a familiar animal in an area they never expected to see it. A recent sighting is typical. Someone was chopping wood, a thylacine allegedly poked its nose out of the bush, had a bit of a look and walked around and then left. A classic sighting. And several visits later we managed to find a half-starved Alsatian that had its ribs were showing and looked quite striped. And it had been dumped there and was checking every car that stopped to see if its owner had come back, I imagine.
In 250-odd sightings which we analysed in 1972, many of them in northeast Tasmania, we came to an explanation which was logical and not a tiger in all but 4. And it's reasonable to say that in those other 4, there is a similar explanation. We just haven't got enough evidence to know what it was, but that again it wasn't a tiger.
Well, credibility is a strange thing because really you need a name to put to the reports, and a lot of people are shy of having, they'll tell me their name and I know their name, but they don't want it publicised. If a tourist's seen a tiger, I'd be very dubious, because from the mainland especially. But when you've been bush bred and born and kind of, you know what's what, you know the forest animals, you couldn't mistake this animal. It's so unique.
Perhaps the most credible sighting on record occurred on the rainy night of March the 9th, 1982. A National Parks and Wildlife Service officer was sleeping in his four-wheel drive on a remote forest track. He woke shortly after 2 a.m.
I stuck my hand out of the window. I stayed in my sleeping bag. I stuck my hand out of the window, swung my spotlight around, and it came to rest on a thylacine, on a Tasmanian tiger. And it stood about 6 metres in front of my vehicle.
That had all the characters of a good sighting. It was close, a long distance, experienced person as far as identification goes. In fact, it was in a circumstances where a mistake really couldn't have been made.
My camera, of course, was at the foot of my sleeping bag. And here I was still with my arm out of the window and rain pouring down it. So as I started to pull my arm down inside to grab my camera, he turned around and he walked, he was standing right there, and he walked off into the bush in that direction. tell you, I didn't sleep much anymore for the rest of that night.
The 200 square kilometre forest catchment was regarded as suitable habitat, had been a source of thylacines during bounty times, and had a history of sightings. National Parks officers had camera equipment in position the next night. The cameras were operated for 3 months with no result. Over the following 15 months, Nick Mooney, an expert tracker, searched extensively for paw prints, based on the theory that even a single animal must leave hundreds of prints each day. None were found. The thylacine described by Hans Narding was a large animal, which by all the laws of biology should have been a resident in the area. No evidence was ever uncovered.
Either there was a thylacine, it was an invention, or it was some remarkable illusion. There was no other witness to Hans' sighting, so Hans would himself admit you were stuck with those 3 possibilities.
The entire operation was successfully kept secret for almost 2 years before a decision was made to announce the investigation and its lack of results to the public. An interesting footnote to this, the most famous of sightings, is that a few years later the Cradle Mountain Link Road was built only 100 kilometres away through comparable forest with a similar history. The road has produced a number of sightings. Today, thylacine sightings only occasionally make the press, but in 1995 a meteor storm blew up when a National Parks and Wildlife summer ranger reported seeing a thylacine near Pine Ghana.
The detail of that sighting was really no better than half the sightings we get in any one year. And because the press got hold of it early and, to practice an understatement, ran with it, we were forced into probably responding a lot more to that one than we would have to it in normal circumstances. The detail of that sighting wasn't exceptional either. The particular ranger concerned was a temporary ranger, not very experienced with wildlife, normal experience for people living in Tasmania and perhaps a bit more, but certainly not a wildlife expert. And the distance was over 300 metres.
I think there's a relatively small group of people that have gone out of their way to develop a mystique surrounding the thylacine. And I think there's also a bit of competitiveness about who can come up with the best evidence.
There would be probably an extra 300 or 400% more sightings would be reported if the people making them knew that they were going to be treated confidentially and there was something constructive going to be done.
So many sightings are coming in per year that there's no way that they can prove that they are still not around.
I might add there are so many sightings of UFOs and other things, and they can't all be wrong. That's probably a comment on that sort of argument.
The booming kangaroo and wallaby population is matched by an increase in the number of Tasmanian devils. All 3 species are more numerous than ever. Theoretically, therefore, the thylacine should be more numerous. So why aren't living specimens being found? An accepted hypothesis is that predation on thylacine young by the more plentiful Tasmanian devils is keeping the population suppressed. Hope that the thylacine survives in suppressed numbers is bolstered by continued sightings.
The spread in the kangaroo wallaby population since the 1960s dovetails in very nicely with the increased sightings and the distribution that I've received over the years. And these reports that I have heard and stories that have been told to me are exactly what I would expect if the animal was coming back from a very serious decline at the beginning of the century.
We get more sightings of thylacines of just as good a quality reported from the mainland as we do here. There have been sightings recorded from the mainland every bit as good as Hans Narding's a number of times. And there's no doubt whatsoever that thylacines do not exist on mainland Australia. I'd be happy to say that categorically, where I would not be happy to say that in Tasmania.
1957, in the Derwent Valley, a number of sheep were killed in a unique manner. An official investigation found none of the usual signs of the sheep being harried to death, as would be expected of a feral dog. An old tiger hunter from the bounty days confirmed the sheep kills characteristic of a thylacine.
The area was sealed off. In fact, people were kept away, the police kept watch, a big cage was set, and that's always been cited as evidence for the tiger. The piece of evidence that we didn't hear about but we tripped upon came when I and Jeremy went to see the Inspector of Police in charge of those operations after he'd retired in Launceston. He said one morning they went up there, the mist was down, they saw this big animal walking up and down in the cage and threw their hats in the air. But when they got to the cage, it was an Alsatian. And when the Alsatian was dispatched, the killing stopped. No tiger.
The mystery remains, however, of why a dog killed a sheep in a manner unique to a large marsupial carnivore.
Another little bit of evidence which I feel supports the theory is occasional sheep skulls that are turning up. And there's a pair of bullet holes, or bullet-like holes there, but I believe that they are indentations made by canine teeth of a large predator. I have compared this skull with skulls of a thylacine from the Queen Victoria Museum, and those canine holes there fit perfectly with the canines of a thylacine.
Footprints can be hoaxed in the bathroom or in the garage or anywhere. They can also be picked up in the field in a genuine fashion. So when people produce those things, bring them to the office or whatever, it's already secondary evidence, it's already compromised. That evidence wouldn't be acceptable in the court of law if it was for a crime, for instance.
That I think if we were to have real evidence that the thylacine exists, then it would be in the form, initially, of some piece of an animal that had died and being fed upon as the remains had been scattered, or else possibly a roadkill.
Tasmanian devils can eat a carcass up completely overnight. The chances of finding a dead tiger out in the bush is 1,000,000 to 1. As a prime carnivore, you don't expect it to be scavenging near the road and get hit as a roadkill. It's shown to be so shy.
Then the old story is that once you've found one and you go back, it's not there. So what do? If you trap it, you'll be fined heavily. If you kill it, well, you'll just about get hung. So the thing is to kind of hope it's still there when you get back, because the tiger doesn't stick around.
I suspect their wariness was somewhere in between a Tasmanian devil and an eastern quoll. That is, in most circumstances, they were wary of people, but not exceptionally hard to find.
I was scared because I didn't know what the hell it was, and I really don't know how I sat there and taped it, because normally I would have been in the car and gone off a shot, because I'm a wimp in the dark in the bush. Yeah, it was like a ghost. It wasn't there. It came, made the noise, and it was gone.
There are some hoaxes. We've uncovered a couple of blatant hoaxes, and they're a serious problem. As far as evidence that wildlife authorities would need to be sure there are thylacines there, it's actually getting harder every year, mainly because of increases in technology. In fact, if you think of the likely scenario as an animal 50 or 100 metres away videoed with a home video, extremely hard to use that as proof. So the evidence is returning to the old style of we probably need a carcass or a live animal.
I've probably had about 15 or 20 really genuine cases of people coming in believing that they've found evidence that the thylacine exists. The time when I first started in the job here, I had maybe half a dozen within the first couple of months. But now in the last, at least 18 months, I haven't had a single person coming in believing that they have evidence of the thylacine. The fact that people have now learned that I'm rather a skeptic about the existence of the thylacine, I think discourages them from bringing the evidence to me, and they'd rather go to somebody who they know in advance is going to have a much more sympathetic sort of ear.
I can categorically state I've seen nothing that's I'm happy as thylacine in the 12 or 13 years I've been doing this in detail, and I might add the 20 or 30 years I've been interested in this sort of subject.
Well, we got hold of the fellow and found out where he caught it. It's the first thing. It should be weighed, measured, blood samples taken for serological work, DNA analysis, all that sort of thing. And then it should be taken back to where it was caught and released, because there's no point having one. We want two, a little boy and a little girl. Again, this brings us back. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to rehabilitate the poor unfortunate creature.
The animal is most probably extinct. There's a very slim chance that they survive, and really to have survived, there can only be very few animals, and they must have the most extraordinary resistance to inbreeding and problems like that, because I can't see that there would be any more than just a few animals.
In Tasmania, the thylacine is never far from mind. There are 30 geographical features around Tasmania named after the thylacine. Numerous companies and organisations ensure the thylacine's image lives on, even if the species may not.
When you've got men like Eric Geiler that have been out in the field so many times and come back empty-handed, it must leave a hollow taste in your mouth. You know, sour taste, it really must, because if anyone deserves to see it, it's that man, Eric Geiler.
After, I suppose, 40 years of looking for tigers, it's a matter of 40 years of frustration. Firstly, I've never caught one. That's the biggest frustration. And secondly, I wouldn't know what to do with it if I caught it.
Despite the fact the living specimen hasn't been presented in 6 decades, despite exhaustive but fruitless searches, despite incredible biological odds, even experts will not dismiss the possibility that the thylacine somehow survives somewhere in Tasmania's remote forests.